Let's head to the Uncommon Grounds Coffee House in Saratoga Springs, New York, where a conversation is brewing. Leading the discussion is Keep It Green's environmental journalist, Dale Willman. Let's listen in.
So the United Nations, when it was founded back in the 40s, one of its primary missions was to bring nation states together and foster international peace. Here we are more than 60 years later. Haven't quite gotten there. Is the UN effective?
The UN isn't just the United Nations, it's the sum total of the member states who make it up. The people who fund it are major powers. It can only act within the sphere that the major countries allow it, and that is one of the big frustrations of countries like India or Pakistan that weren't major players in World War II, coming onto the world stage and saying, hey, we want to have a bigger voice in not just peacekeeping, where the UN since the 90s has done some good things. It separated combatants in the Western Sahara. It helped to slowly, and in large part because of the member states, take a long time to get Haiti a good peacekeeping mission going there. So part of the constraints really are the players. And the players are the UN Secretariat and this giant bureaucracy that does bring aid to refugees that no one else does, brings food to countries that don't have it.
And World Aid's significant. That's a major portion of what they do.
Right, but I mean, the question arises, should that be what the UN does? And I mean, it does that better than it does international security. But I also think we tend to expect too much from the UN, and we expect the UN to solve every problem. And there are literally thousands of NGOs working around the world on the ground that do things better than the UN, more efficiently than the UN, with less bureaucracy than the UN. And, sometimes we cut off aid to them too, but,
One of the really interesting things about the UN and the United States is that we don't pay. We don't pay our dues, and we haven't paid our dues in many, many years. It's very hard to take credibly the arguments by the U.S. government and by politicians that the UN's ineffectual when we're not paying our dues. We're not really participating. Do you see an end to that, or is that going to be the death of the UN?
I don't think it's the death of the UN. I think it's caused the UN to change its priorities and change the way it responds to the U.S. Again, we're a bunch of Americans sitting around a table having a conversation about whether the UN is effective or not. But if I lived in the village where, there's a group helping women get finance, where there's a group helping improve education or bringing in sanitation.
The UN has done a very good job of promoting human rights and then actually trying to follow it up with agencies and programs, particularly in the realm of gender equality and empowering women and things like that. I mean, it's a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, it's a hugely expansive agenda, and so how can they do it well, right? On the other hand, it's important that they're doing it. And I think that's probably the basis for a lot of criticism of the UN, is that it's trying to do so much for so many people. I mean, only provide human rights for the entire population. Okay, sure, we'll do that, and then next week we'll do something else.
So many NGOs being involved in all of these third world countries in particular, where aid becomes an issue and security is an issue. Right. And we've seen the UN, I think, constantly be hobbled. Rwanda is an excellent case in point, where you actually have instances where the UN peacekeeping forces are literally not allowed to do anything as genocide is committed.
Well, in a sense, is this 2 steps forward, 1 step back? Rwanda, Sudan, there are many instances where you can look at, if not failures, difficulties.
Right. But blaming the United Nations is sort of blaming the institution, when the failure really was a failure of the member states who refused to authorize them to use force. So then, right.
But what I am saying is, isn't there maybe another template?
There are now 200 nation states that would have to negotiate to create a new international organization. Given how well these nation states sometimes get along together or don't, it seems like better to fix what we have instead of trying to start from scratch. Right.
So where does this take us then?
We take stock of where we are 60 years on, look at the proliferation of human rights work, development work, environmental work that the UN is now fostering in this global sense. And maybe, the UN should ratchet down its own rhetoric a little bit, focus on what it can do, and not worry about what it can't do.
So I think what I'm taking away from this discussion is a greater appreciation for the complexity involved here. The United Nations clearly is not just a black and white issue, love it or hate it. It's much more complex than that. And I think it seems to boil down to whether we need to ratchet back expectations or obligations of the organization. And clearly we're not going to answer that today. But I thank you all for coming out. This has been a great conversation. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.